Imagine the sound of a New Year's Eve party. The bass thumping in your chest. The glasses clinking, the countdown beginning. 10, 9, 8. It is the night of December 31st, 2025. We are in a nightclub in Royal Oak, Michigan. The atmosphere is electric. People are celebrating fresh starts. They are laughing, they are drinking. And in the middle of the crowd, there is a man. He is partying harder than anyone. He looks like he doesn't have a care in the world. He looks like he is celebrating. But 30 miles away, in a quiet apartment complex in Milford, there is no music. There is no countdown, there is only silence. And a door that has just been kicked open by police. Because the man at the club, the one holding the drink, the one smiling at the bartender, he knows something that no one else in that room knows. He knows exactly why the apartment in Milford is so quiet. This isn't just a story about a crime of passion. This is a case study in what forensic psychologists call a flight to normalcy. According to reports filed just days ago by the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, what happened on New Year's Eve 2025 was not a random tragedy. It was the final, brutal calculation of a relationship that had already ended. We often think of danger as something that hides in the shadows, something that looks scary. But in this case, the danger was standing under the strobe lights of a nightclub, blending in perfectly, while his victim lay undiscovered less than an hour's drive away. The victim, a 26-year-old man named Peyton, had done nothing wrong. He wasn't involved in a gang. He wasn't in debt. He wasn't living a high-risk lifestyle. His only mistake was dating someone new. He was the replacement. And in the mind of the man at the club, that was a capital offense. But here is the strange part. The detail that makes you pause. The police didn't stumble upon this scene by accident. They didn't find the suspect after a week-long manhunt. They found him that same night because someone knew. At 4:25 p.m., hours before the ball dropped, a phone call was made, a welfare check. It was a call made by a woman who knew that silence was a weapon. She knew that if Peyton wasn't answering, it wasn't because he was busy. It was because he couldn't. Before we walk through the timeline of this night from the silence, in Milford to the chaos, in Royal Oak High, want to ask you to hit that like button. It's a small action, but it helps these stories reach the people who need to hear them. It helps us expose the warning signs before they turn into headlines. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. We don't do shock value here. We do the truth. I want to know, where are you watching from tonight? Comment your country below. It is incredible to see how this community connects people from London to Sydney to Detroit, all searching for the same answers. Your engagement honors the victims and proves that their stories matter. Now, let's go back to the beginning. To understand why a man ends up partying after a murder, we have to go back to early December 2025. Just a few weeks before the new year. The relationship between 29-year-old Matthew Molinaro and his girlfriend had collapsed. Breakups happen every day. They are painful, they are messy, but usually they are safe. This one was not. The breakup wasn't just an emotional split. It was a legal one. The girlfriend, whose name we will withhold to protect her privacy, did exactly what the system tells you to do when you are afraid. She went to the authorities. She filed for a personal protection order, a PPO. For those outside the US, a PPO is a court order. It is a piece of paper signed by a judge that says, "You cannot come here. You cannot contact her. You cannot threaten her." It is supposed to be a shield. It is supposed to draw a line in the sand that says, "If you cross this, you go to jail." Matthew Molinaro was served with this order. He knew the rules. He knew the boundaries. But research in domestic homicide shows us a terrifying paradox. Sometimes, the moment you put up a wall is the moment the offender decides to break it down. Psychologists call it an extinction burst. When an abuser realizes they are losing control when the property is being taken away, they don't back down. They escalate. Life, on the surface, seemed to be moving on. By late December, the girlfriend had started seeing someone new. Peyton Bilbia. He worked at a flooring company. He was a graduate of Holly High School. By all accounts, he was a normal, well-loved young man. He was building a life. He had nothing to do with Matthew Molinaro. He likely knew about him, maybe heard the stories, maybe knew about the PPO, but he wasn't part of that history. He was the fresh start. And that was the problem. Because to a man like Molinaro, Peyton wasn't a person. He was a symbol. He was proof that the control was gone. Proof that the girlfriend wasn't just taking a break, but was actually leaving. As New Year's Eve approached, a day loaded with pressure, a day defined by who you are with, the tension began to spike. Most people look at December 31st as a deadline for their goals. It appears Molinaro looked at it as a deadline for something else entirely. To understand the violence of that night, we have to look at the calendar. Most of us think of a breakup as an ending. You say goodbye, you divide the belongings, and the story stops. But in the world of forensic psychology, a breakup isn't an ending. It is a trigger. Experts call it separation assault. Research consistently shows that the most dangerous time in an abusive or controlling relationship is not when the couple is together. It is the moment the victim leaves. In fact, a woman is 75% more likely to be killed after she walks out the door than when she is staying. For Matthew Molinaro, the clock started ticking in early December 2025. We don't know the exact details of the final argument. We don't know what specific words were said between him and his girlfriend. But we know the result. She left. And she didn't just leave. She signaled that she was afraid. This is where the story shifts from a bad breakup to a criminal trajectory. When someone fears for their safety, they are told to trust the system. They are told to get legal protection, and she did. This brings us to the first major turning point in this case. The revelation that changes how we view the suspect. He wasn't just a heartbroken ex-boyfriend pining for a second chance. He was a respondent in a legal case. In early December, a judge granted a personal protection order against Matthew Molinaro. Now, pause for a second. Think about what that piece of paper actually means to you and me as Bowder. It is the law saying stop. But to a certain type of psychological profile, APPO is something else entirely. It is a challenge. Psychologists describe a phenomenon called the Extinction Burst. Think of a toddler throwing a tantrum because they can't have a toy. They scream louder, they hit, they break things. They escalate their behavior to force the parent to give in. Now apply that to an adult male with a history of control issues. When the PPO was served, it stripped Molinaro of his access. He couldn't call, he couldn't visit, he couldn't text. The toy, the partner was taken away. And instead of accepting that boundary, the evidence suggests he began to obsess over it. This is the paradox of the restraining order. It is absolutely necessary for safety, yet for a short, volatile window, it can make an offender more dangerous. Because now, they have nothing left to lose. The relationship is gone. The reputation is damaged. The legal system is involved. The only thing left is the anger. And then, into this volatile, pressurized situation, walked Peyton Bilbia. Peyton was the variable Molinaro hadn't calculated. By late December, Peyton and the girlfriend were officially seeing each other. It was new, it was happy. It was everything the old relationship wasn't. But in the mind of a fixated stalker, a new partner isn't seen as a human being. They are seen as a thief. This is a dynamic called triangulation. The offender convinces themselves that this person is the reason for their misery. If he wasn't there, she would come back. If he wasn't there, I would have control again. Peyton became the target not because of who he was, but because of where he was standing. He was standing next to her. We don't know if Molinaro was watching them physically. We don't know if he was tracking social media posts. But the specificity of the attack suggests he knew exactly who Peyton was. He knew where he lived. He knew his routine. He was gathering intelligence. While the rest of the world was buying Christmas presents, Matthew Molinaro was likely building a mental map of his ex-girlfriend's new life. A life he was legally forbidden from entering. This brings us to New Year's Eve, December 31st. If you look at crime statistics, holidays are flashpoints. They are days loaded with emotional weight. If you are lonely, you feel lonelier. If you are angry, you feel angrier. Imagine Molinaro on that day. The entire world is preparing to celebrate out with the old, in with the new. Everywhere he looks, he sees reminders of fresh starts. And he is stuck in the old. Prosecutors allege that on this day, the planning turned into action. The charge he is facing today is first-degree premeditated murder. That is a very specific legal term. It means this wasn't a snap decision. It wasn't a bar fight that went too far. Premeditation means he thought about it. He prepared for it. He had to get from his home in Sterling Heights or the surrounding area to Milford. That is not a short trip, it's a drive. A drive that gives you plenty of time to turn around. Plenty of time to cool off. He didn't turn around. He drove toward the apartment on East Summit Street. We need to talk about the apartment itself. Your home is supposed to be your sanctuary. It is the one place where you lock the door and the world can't get you. Peyton Bilbia was inside his sanctuary. We don't know yet how Molinaro got in. There are two terrifying possibilities. One, he broke in, a forced entry. The sound of glass breaking or wood splintering, followed by immediate violence. Two, he was let in, or the door was unlocked. Maybe Peyton opened it, expecting a friend. Expecting the girlfriend. This is the nightmare scenario. You open your door to let in the new year, and instead, you let in your past. The police report describes a violent attack. We won't go into the graphic details, but we know it involved a knife. Knives are personal weapons. They require proximity. You have to be close enough to touch the person you are hurting. This wasn't a drive-by shooting. This was intimate, rage-filled violence. And it happened in the quiet of the afternoon. while neighbors were likely home, watching TV, getting ready for parties. It happened behind a closed door. And then, it was over. This is the part that is hardest to process. After the violence, there is usually a reaction. Panic, remorse. Calling 911, but Molinaro didn't call 911. He didn't turn himself in. He left. He walked out of that apartment, leaving Peyton on the floor. He closed the door behind him. He likely got back into his car. And he drove away. He didn't drive into hiding. He didn't drive to a police station. He drove toward Royal Oak, toward the nightlife, toward the party. He had just committed an act that would end one life and destroy his own, but his immediate reaction was to go find a drink. Back in the world of the living, the girlfriend was waiting. It was 4 p.m. She sends a text. No reply. She calls. Straight to voicemail. For a woman with a PPO, no reply triggers a different part of the brain. It triggers the survival instinct. She didn't wait until midnight. She didn't wait for the ball to drop. At 4:25 p.m., she made the call that would end the charade. I haven't heard from him. Can you please check? She knew. Deep down, she knew that the piece of paper, the PPO, hadn't stopped him. She knew that the silence was the sound of the extinction burst. The police were dispatched. They rolled toward East Summit Street. And as their sirens started to wail in the distance, Matthew Molinaro was likely checking his mirror, smoothing his clothes, and getting ready to step into the club. Two worlds were about to collide. It is now late afternoon. The winter sun is setting over Michigan. The temperature is dropping. In Milford, the patrol cars pull up to the apartment complex on East Summit Street. Welfare checks are usually slow. Officers knock, they wait. They check windows, they look for signs of life. They are hoping for a misunderstanding. Maybe Peyton is asleep. Maybe he lost his phone. But as they stand at the door, the silence from inside isn't peaceful, it is heavy. Officers are trained to recognize the difference between an empty house and a crime scene. Even from the outside, something feels wrong. The intuition of the girlfriend, that terrified phone call, hangs over the scene. They make the decision to breach. They force the door open. And in that moment, the hope of a misunderstanding evaporates. They find Peyton Bilbia inside. And immediately, it is clear that no paramedics are needed. It is clear that this was not an accident or a health issue. Police reports describe the scene as a violent attack. We will not dwell on the specifics of the injuries, out of respect for Peyton and his family. But we need to understand the reality of what happened in that room. This was personal. It was up close. It was a release of rage that had been building for weeks. Peyton, a young man who had his whole life ahead of him, who was days away from starting a new year, was gone. He would never see 2026. He would never know that his girlfriend tried to save him. The apartment, which should have been filled with the sounds of getting ready for a party, was now a homicide scene. Now, I want you to hold that image in your mind. The police tape going up. The medical examiner being called. The absolute devastation of a family about to get the worst phone call of their lives. Now, cut to Royal Oak, 30 miles away. At the exact moment police are processing the tragedy in Milford, Matthew Molinaro is walking into a bar. This is the moment that makes this case so psychologically chilling. Most people, after witnessing or committing violence, go into a state of shock. They hide, they panic. They vomit, their body rejects what they have done. Molinaro did the opposite. He went to a party. This is what psychologists call flight to normalcy. It is a defense mechanism where the mind attempts to reject the reality of a traumatic event by immersing itself in the mundane, or in this case, the celebratory. By surrounding himself with music, with alcohol, with laughing people, he was building a wall against the truth. He was pretending that, if he acted like a normal guy on New Year's Eve, then he was just a normal guy on New Year's Eve. He was drinking. He was socializing. He was blending in with people who had no idea they were standing next to a man who had just come from a murder scene. It is a terrifying thought. You never know who is standing next to you at the bar. You never know what they did an hour ago. Back in Milford, the investigation moved at lightning speed. Homicide. Detectives don't believe in coincidences. When they identified the victim as Peyton Bilbia, they likely immediately looked at his connections. And they found the girlfriend. And through her, they found the PPO. The personal protection order, the document that failed to stop Molinaro from entering the apartment, became the key to catching him. It had his name, his address, his vehicle description. It pointed the arrow straight at him. Detectives quickly realized this wasn't a whodunit. They knew who'd square. They began tracking him. In 2026, it is very hard to disappear. Your phone pings towers. Your car passes license plate readers. Your credit card leaves a digital footprint. While Molinaro was at the club, trying to outrun his conscience, the digital dragnet was closing around him. The Oakland County Sheriff's Fugitive Apprehension Team was activated. These are not patrol officers. These are specialists trained to take down high-risk suspects. They tracked him to the establishment in Royal Oak. Picture the scene inside the club. It is loud. The lights are flashing. The bass is shaking the floor. People are shouting to be heard over the music. It is the peak of celebration. And then the doors open. But it isn't more partygoers entering. It is the Fugitive Apprehension Team. The contrast is jarring. Tactical gear amidst cocktail dresses. Grim faces amidst smiles. They move through the crowd. They aren't looking for a fight. They are looking for one face, and they find him. Matthew Molinaro, the man who thought he could wash away a murder with a New Year's Eve party, is surrounded. The music doesn't stop instantly, but the mood shifts. People turn, they stare. What is happening? Who is that guy? Police approached him. There was no standoff. No hostage situation, no high-speed chase. He was taken into custody right there, amidst the balloons and the streamers. The flight to normalcy had crashed. This arrest changes how we look at the entire timeline. If he had stayed at the scene and called 911, his defense lawyers might have argued it was a crime of passion, a moment of madness that he immediately regretted. But the club changes everything. The fact that he could drive 30 miles, park his car, walk into a venue, order a drink, and function socially, that speaks to something much darker than passion. It speaks to compartmentalization. It suggests he could shut off the part of his brain that contained the horror of what he did to Peyton, and turn on the part that wanted to have a good time. It suggests a level of detachment that borders on sociopathic. When they put the handcuffs on him, the party for Matthew Molinaro was over. But for the family of Peyton Bilbia, the nightmare was just beginning. As they walked him out of the club, past the confused onlookers, the reality set in. He wasn't going home to sleep it off. He was going to the Oakland County Jail. And 30 miles away, the coroner was arriving at the apartment in Milford. 2 young men, one dead. One headed to a cell for potentially the rest of his life. And all of it because of a refusal to accept that a relationship was over. All of it because of an extinction burst that exploded into lethal violence. But as the police drove him away, a new question began to form. We know who did it. We know where he went. But there are still gaps in this story. The 30 miles between the crime and the club. The weapon, the specific timeline. The investigation wasn't over just because the handcuffs were on. In fact, for the detectives, the work was just starting. They had to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this wasn't just a tragedy. It was a plan, and to look the gaps. The sun rose on January 1st, 2026. For most of Michigan, it was the start of a new year. A day for sleeping in, watching football, and recovering from the night before. But inside the Oakland County Prosecutor's office, there was no holiday break. They had a suspect in custody. They had a crime scene secured. But in a murder investigation, an arrest is not a conviction. The burden of proof was now on the state. They had to take the chaos of the previous night and organize it into a timeline that would stand up in court. And as detectives began to piece together the hours between the silence in Milford and the music in Royal Oak, a disturbing picture began to emerge. This is where the investigation gets complicated. We have to fix points in time. Point A, the welfare check at 4:25 p.m. Point B, the arrest at the club later that night. But between those 2 points lies a gap. A gap of 30 miles and several unexplained hours. Let's look at the geography. Milford, where Peyton lived, is a quiet, semi-rural suburb. Royal Oak is a bustling metro hub. The drive between them is roughly 45 minutes. This drive became the centerpiece of the detective's theory. Why? Because distance equals time. And in the eyes of the law, time equals thought. If this had happened in the heat of an argument, if Molinaro and Peyton had been in the same room, fighting, and things escalated, that is one thing. That is second-degree murder, that is manslaughter. But Molinaro didn't live there. He had to travel there. Investigators likely mapped his route. They looked at the traffic cameras. They looked at the GPS data from his vehicle. Every mile he drove toward Milford was a choice. Every exit he passed was an opportunity to turn around. He had 45 minutes to think about the PPO. 45 minutes to think about the consequences. 45 minutes to choose to go home. He didn't. This drive is what transforms a tragedy into a calculated execution. It suggests that when he got into his car, the decision had already been made. While one team of detectives was mapping the drive, another was looking at the PPO. We talked earlier about how the personal protection order failed to stop him. It failed to act as a shield. But in the investigation phase, that piece of paper became a weapon for the prosecution. The PPO established motive and intent. It proved that the conflict was not new. It proved that Molinaro had been legally warned to stay away. By violating that order just to enter the property, he was already committing a crime before he even raised a weapon. It also destroyed any potential defense of "I just went to talk." You don't drive 30 miles to just talk to someone you are legally forbidden from contacting. At the home of a man you view as a rival. The PPO turned the narrative from jealous ex to criminal trespasser. By Sunday, January 4th, the initial investigation was complete. The evidence was overwhelming. Matthew Molinaro was arraigned. And this is where the hammer dropped. The prosecutors didn't charge him with manslaughter. They didn't charge him with second-degree murder. They announced charges of first-degree premeditated murder. In Michigan, this is the most severe charge possible. It carries a mandatory penalty of life in prison without the possibility of parole. There is no coming back from it. Oakland County Prosecutor Karen McDonald released a statement that cut to the core of the case. She didn't mince words about the domestic violence aspect. She highlighted the danger of the post-breakup window. She validated the fear that the girlfriend had felt. And the judge agreed with the severity. When the issue of bond came up, the question of whether Molinaro could be released while awaiting trial, the answer was a definitive no. Bond was denied. The man who was partying in Royal Oak just days earlier was now sitting in a cell, facing the reality that he might never walk free again. However, even with the suspect locked up, there are questions that remain unanswered for the public. 1. The weapon. Police reports mention a violent attack and stab wounds. But in the chaos of the arrests at the club, was the weapon on him? Did he dispose of it during that 30-mile drive? Finding the weapon is critical for forensic matching. 2. The entry. How exactly did he get into Peyton's apartment? There were no reports of a shattered door frame in the initial dispatch. Did he trick Peyton into opening the door? Did he have a key that he shouldn't have had? This detail matters because it speaks to the level of deception involved. 3. The club timeline. How long was he at the club before police arrived? Did he talk to anyone? Did he tell anyone what he had done? These are the questions that will be fought over in the coming months as this case moves toward trial. But legal arguments are abstract. They are about statutes and evidence codes. For the people left behind, the reality is much more concrete. The investigation proved that the girlfriend was right to be afraid. It proved that her intuition was flawless. But it also proved that sometimes being right isn't enough. The system worked as designed. The police responded. The detectives investigated. The prosecutors charged. But they were all reacting to a clock that had already run out. As we move to the end of this story, we have to look away from the killer and back at the victim. We have to look at the cost of this extinction burst. Because while Molinaro sits in jail preparing for his defense, a family in Milford is preparing for a funeral that should never have happened. As of this recording, Matthew Molinaro sits in a cell in the Oakland County Jail. The legal process is moving forward with the mechanical precision of the state. He has been charged with first-degree premeditated murder. In Michigan, that charge carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. There is no middle ground. If convicted, he will never walk into a nightclub again. He will never celebrate another New Year's Eve as a free man. His next court date, a probable cause conference, is set for January 19th. It will be the first step in a long trial where the prosecution will lay out the timeline we have just walked through. The drive, the breach, the silence, the party. But for the families involved, the court dates are just markers on a calendar that has already been shattered. Justice, in its legal definition, is being served. The police did their job. The prosecutor is doing hers. The suspect is off the streets. But legal justice is reactive. It punishes the act, but it cannot undo it. It cannot reverse the 45-minute drive from Royal Oak to Milford. It is easy in true crime stories for the victim to become a footnote, to become just a name in a police report or a photo on the news. We cannot let that happen to Peyton Bilbia. He was 20 years old. He worked at a flooring company. He had friends, family, and a future that was wide open. He was doing exactly what any young person should be doing, working hard and starting a new relationship. He was innocent in the purest sense of the word. He wasn't involved in the toxicity of the past relationship. He wasn't a rival. He was just a man who fell in love with someone who happened to have a dangerous past. He was the replacement in Molinaro's mind, but to his family, he is irreplaceable. He died because he was standing in a spot that another man felt he still owned. And then there is the girlfriend. We have to acknowledge the specific, heavy burden she carries. She is the survivor. She did everything society tells women to do. She recognized the red flags. She left the relationship. She went to the court. She got the personal protection order. She called for the welfare check the moment her intuition spiked. She made no mistakes, and yet she still has to live with the outcome. This is the cruelty of stalker dynamics. The offender forces the victim to feel responsible for the violence. Molinaro's actions were designed to hurt her, and by targeting Peyton, he found a way to inflict a wound that will never fully heal. She has to live with the knowledge that her attempt to move on, her attempt to be happy, was used as the justification for murder. It is a burden no one should have to carry. This case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about our safety systems. We tell victims, get a restraining order and you will be safe. And for 90% of cases, that is true. Most people respect the law. Most people fear jail. But for the other 10%, for the men like Matthew Molinaro, a piece of paper is not a wall, it is an accelerant. The Extinction Burst we talked about earlier proves that for some psychological profiles, the law is just another thing to break. This doesn't mean we shouldn't get PPOs. It doesn't mean the system is useless. But it means we have to be honest about its limits. A judge's signature can authorize an arrest after a violation, but it cannot physically stop a man from getting into his car. It cannot block a knife. Safety is not a guarantee. It is a collective effort. It requires the vigilance of neighbors, the speed of police, and the awareness that when a relationship ends, the danger doesn't always end with it. As we look back at New Year's Eve 2025, the image that remains is not the police tape. It is the image of the club. It is the terrifying ability of a human being to compartmentalize horror, to kill, and then to dance. It reminds us that the people capable of the darkest acts don't always look like monsters. They don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes, they are the life of the party. They are the ones buying the next round, laughing at the jokes, counting down the seconds to midnight. While the rest of us are looking forward to the future, they are busy erasing someone else's. We tell victims to leave. We tell them to lock their doors. But we rarely tell them what to do when the danger decides to simply knock.